TV viewers, welcome to another episode of What's Growing On. And we finally got to move outside to do some filming today because it's finally got nice and warm enough, and we've got a nice cool breeze here in my side yard, and just kind of enjoying the day, kind of listening to my bird bath here, just a bubbling in the fountain and the birds. And so it's just an all-out nice day, and it's finally warm enough to really start getting out there and planting and not have to move plants in and out or cover them up. And I wait on the smart side and was really cautious, so I'm just starting the process. But, you know, all is good. It'll get done, and what doesn't get done, I guess I'm the only one that knows that it didn't get done. But today's episode is probably one of my favorite ones, and I've written about this in the past, and I've done an episode before a couple of years back where we actually did do some of these tests, but I'm talking about myths in the garden. You know, I hear a lot as a master gardener of people that do some very unusual things because it was something that their grandparents did or their mothers did. And, you know, a lot has changed, especially when you become a master gardener. You really start following University of Minnesota Extension teachings and findings and that. And it's even just other extension groups across the United States. So some of this information that I'm presenting is from a lot of different places. And so we're going to cover some of those crazy garden myths out there, and, you know, the do's and the don'ts, and what it actually how it can harm your garden, and why you shouldn't do it. So, you know, let's give it a kickoff here. We've got some props here that we're going to be using along the way, and so let's just jump into it. Okay, so the first one here, adding sugar to the hole when you plant your tomatoes is going to make them sweeter. Not so at all. By adding sugar to the soil when you're planting your tomatoes is actually going to pull nitrogen away, and it's also going to, you know, stimulate some bacterial growth. And what does make a tomato sweeter? You know, nothing really. It's just actually the natural tomato. And if you try different varieties of tomatoes, all of them are going to have a little bit different flavor depending on if it's a newer variety or if it's a heirloom variety, if it's you know, there's orange tomatoes, there's white tomatoes, and this year I'm putting in a lemon boy, which is a little bit less acidic in taste. So it all just depends on the variety that you're putting in your garden. So if you're going to use sugar for anything, go in and bake some cookies, or take a cup of this, 4 cups of water, warm it up, let it cool, put it in a hummingbird feeder, and after you get done planting, sit down, grab a nice cool drink, and watch the hummingbirds. And that's really what sugar is good for. Another one that I hear a lot is eggshells under your tomato to prevent blossom end rot. No, not at all. As you know, eggshells are really made up of calcium, and that's why you get the blossom end rot. And what is blossom end rot? Well, you'll notice it as your tomato starts to grow and to ripen. On the end of it, you're going to start to see a brown spot that looks like rot, and that's basically blossom end rot. And what blossom end rot is caused by is lack of calcium uptake into your plant. And by using just regular eggshells like this, it's really the amount of calcium that gets leached into the soil is so minimal, it's not even efficient enough to really make a difference in stopping that blossom end rot. So basically, consistent watering is really what you want to do. And that's, you know, some deep watering, because that's what is going to help that plant grow better along the way. And so it's not really that great of a fix. So if you're going to use eggshells anywhere, throw them in your compost pile and let them decompose over time with the rest of your food scraps that you have out there. And that's going to be a heck of a lot better. And another way too is to, if you're having problems with blossom end rot, you know, it is a very big problem here in Minnesota for tomato growers like myself. And so basically look for, and one of the tomatoes that really affects a lot are some of the plum tomatoes that are the determinate variety, which really set all their tomatoes at once and are more meatier. So like one of the varieties that they really suggest is a celebrity tomato like this. And they're less susceptible to blossom end rot. The Wisconsin 55 is another one that's a little less susceptible to blossom end rot. So look for those varieties and do a little, you know, information digging on that to just kind of help you along the way. So even if they're pulverized, it's just not worth it. So don't save it unless you've got a compost pile and just throw in those eggshells that way. Okay, another myth. You need to water your vegetable garden every day. And I'm just as guilty of that as anybody else. But what I've come to learn over the years is the fact that it's not so much watering every day in your garden. It's deep watering that helps your vegetables and your plants. And by deep watering, you want to leave that, you know, sprinkler system go, you know, for a good hour, and you want, you know, a good deep watering where it's going way down deep in the soil. And when you have that deep watering, you can hold off 2 or 3 days to water, because that what happens is by having that deeper water in your garden, you know, where it's, you know, deeper into the soil, it's going to create a stronger root system for your plants, and it's going to make it a sturdier plant. It's going to be less disease resistant. And also by not watering every day, you're keeping those leaves dry, especially tomatoes where they're susceptible to a lot of foliar diseases if their leaves are wet, and that's where you're getting a lot of your wilt and blossom end rot and whatever. So by watering, you actually get a chance to just let everything dry out a little bit, because they'll take some of that dryness and it'll create a stronger root system as it reaches down further and further into the soil for that water that you've done your deep watering with. And if you can water from the bottom, a lot of people don't like to use overhead waters, that they run a soaker hose system. That works even better, because again, you're keeping it off the leaves. And also by overhead watering, you know, you're knocking some of the pollen off of some of your tomato plants and pepper plants. And really, you want it to have those be dry because you want them to pollinate. And by constantly having that wet, it's knocking that pollen off. And so you're not having your beneficial insects go from plant to pollinate to get the fruit on your plants. So again, don't water every day, just water low and slow and deep. Kind of like you're cooking a pork roast. Low and slow is the way to go. Epsom salt for your garden. It's a miracle cure, they say. No, not at all. I'm starting to see people thinking magnesium as a whole, which is what Epsom salts are, is the cure-all for sleep problems, where you have a lotion that you can put on your legs to help you sleep at night, and putting that magnesium through Epsom salt into your garden. It's a cure-all. And this magnesium in Minnesota soils is a natural occurrence, actually. So unless you are soil testing, you have no idea if you have a magnesium deficiency in your garden. So first and foremost, again, stressing it again, do that soil test and see what what your nutrient deficiency is. And if it's magnesium, find something a little bit better than Epsom salts. And actually, if you're using it blindly, you can actually worsen blossom end rot in your garden, and it can which also interferes with calcium uptake. So again, soil test before you add Epsom salts. Save it for the bath, those Epsom salts. Ants are needed to open peony flowers. So my peony is about getting ready to bloom here. And when I went over to pick this, I did notice that there were ants crawling on it. And they say that they need them to open. Well, not really. Peony buds right in there have these tiny little organs called extrafloral nectaries that secrete sweet nectar, which is what's attracting the ants. And that's why you see ants always on peony bushes. And these ants feed on this nectar, and by feeding on that nectar, they're also acting very aggressively in defending that flower from other bad insects that could affect your peony blossom. But they will open just fine without them. You know, for instance, florists nowadays are actually getting people to cut peony buds by of a certain size, and then what they do is they wrap them in wet paper towels or whatever, and then put them in their refrigerator, because these are short-lived and they don't bloom all summer, so one and done. So what they do, because these have become a really big flower in the floral industry for bouquets, for weddings, for altar spray arrangements and stuff. So they want to be able to prolong that season. So what they're doing is they're cutting these buds along the way and then taking them out as they need to get them to open up at the desired time. And if they need them to open in the house, and you certainly don't want ants all over your house, so don't worry about if you don't see any ants on your peony. They're just going to be fine. Coffee grounds will make your flower garden more acidic. You know, coffee grounds, they're essentially pH neutral. There's not a lot of acid in here at all. They don't really do anything. They can actually suppress growth. Like, say, you know, one year in the fall, I was saving these. I would just take them out and throw them on top of the garden over the winter before I did anything. And next spring when I went, this had kind of formed this nasty little crust on the top of it. So I had to really work it back into the soil. And it really didn't hurt anything, but it really kind of can harm your soil by not being able to take in that water on that first pass through. So you really, if you are going to put it in your garden at this time, you know, really work it into the soil so that it's, you know, crumbly like this and not leaving it dry out. But the best place to put it is when you take your eggshells to the compost pile, take your coffee grounds and let it decompose naturally with the rest of your compost, rather than just directly adding it to it, because it's not really doing anything at all for your garden. Now this is a new one that I'm starting to see, is save your boiled pasta and potato water to water your plants. Okay, come on, people. Really? Saving the water from boiling this? Well, I don't know. When I learned from Food Network, is some of these chefs would talk about boiling pasta correctly, and it was like, when you fill your pot of water, and you make sure you add lots of salt, because they're virtually bland without any seasoning. So you want to make your water salty like the sea. So you add a lot of salt in it to impart some flavor into your pasta and into your potatoes. Well, now you've got a pot full of pasta water, which has got starch in it from the flour, from the starch from the potato, and then the starch from the flour in the pasta, along with the salt, and it's just kind of this gelatinous mess. Have you ever just left the pasta water or potato water on the stove after you've taken everything out? Say you decide you're going to save it. It's kind of a gloppy mess, and it really just, when you pour it into your soil, it really just creates just a gloppy mess, and it can kind of just harden your soil up, and it's just kind of gross, you know? And even to just clean it after that, it's kind of, yeah. So you just don't do it, okay? Don't use it, just pour it. Or save your pasta water to add to your sauce a little bit to help thicken it up that way. So those are some of the kind of fun ones. So here's a quick myth buster section here. So mothballs to keep rabbits away. No. First of all, spreading them around your yard to deter rabbits from your yard. First of all, it's illegal. Second of all, it's really smelly. And if you're really going to use mothballs, you know, it's really just repel moths, not anything else. And on top of that, you could have not only critters, pets, dogs, But a little kid running through your neighborhood sees this little white ball. They're thinking, oh, marshmallow, and they put it in their mouth. Well, that's not a good thing, you know. And as not only as a parent, but especially now as a grandparent, you tend to watch those things. So put the mothballs in the moth closet. Don't put them in your garden. I get a lot of questions when we're pruning trees about painting the ends of the tree. You really don't want to do that, because that actually encourages pathogens that are not good for the tree to set into it, because it's not giving it a room to breathe. For example, I kind of liken it to when you cut your finger. You go and you clean it out with warm soap and water, and then you put a little bacitracin on it, and you wrap a bandage around it. And you know, if you leave it too long, it really doesn't get to healing, because it just stays moist in there. You don't get that air. But once you start being brave enough, especially little kids, to keep that bandage off, you know, that natural air really helps kind of, you know, seal that itself naturally. And so that's what the same thing with the tree. It basically when you cut it and don't seal it, it compartmentalizes and it heals itself. Another one, young trees need staking. Many years ago, we put in a new oak tree in our front yard, which is fabulous now, but we did notice it start to leaning a little bit because we hadn't staked it, because we do get quite a bit of wind here in our yard. So we did stake it. We did the research that we needed to and staked it properly. But generally, you don't need to stake it, because by not staking it, it makes that trunk a lot stronger, because it learns to withstand that wind back and forth, and it makes it stronger so that it's not going to snap. Another one I hear a lot is, well, I have a pot with no holes. Can I just put gravel in it? Well, no, don't do that. First of all, it's going to make the pot really heavy. And what happens is that's all those rocks in the bottom basically create kind of a reservoir, and it fits into those nooks and crannies of the rocks, and it's just kind of, it's going to create root rot for your plant. So if you can drill a hole in a pot, or make sure you always, when you buy a pot, make sure that you have a hole in the bottom of it. And then all I do is, to cover up that hole there, I just put a little piece of paper towel in there, or a coffee filter, and that at least the water runs through and not the soil. So that's another little tip to keep your plant and root system healthy. So those are just a few garden myths that I've got for you today, to kind of help you be a little bit more successful. And I know you're just going to, you know, maybe hurt your feelings, your ancestors' feelings, because it always worked for them. But learn to do a little research, because really the tried and true methods, that's why your extension services are there, that they're actually doing the research and they're actually going out and testing these. I think the one year I did the Epsom salts and the eggshell thing. I did tomatoes and peppers, and my trusty camera guy here was my taste tester, and he really tasted no difference. So it really did not make, you know, any sense at all to try those things. So with that, I am going to go in now, and I brewed a pot of coffee earlier. I'm gonna go in and get myself a cup of iced coffee, and then I'm gonna finish up my potato salad and my pasta salad and get that all fixed up and ready for supper. And then tomorrow morning, I'm gonna hit the garden, plant my tomatoes and peppers, and I had my soil tested, and I'm a little bit nitrogen deficient, so I'm gonna take this organic, all-natural plant food blood meal, which is basically all nitrogen. And then when I'm done with that, I'm gonna take this bag of Epsom salts, because after all that work, I'm gonna fill up a nice hot bath and put in my Epsom salts, take my iced coffee, kick back and relax. And with that, I bid you happy gardening.